as a Black woman who lived through COVID in New York City.
I was 27 when I published that story. It better have been.
And it brings shame on a storied name.
Me playing the race card.
And if you want to cut him off and censor him some more, you're welcome to do it.
Oh, that's not my job.
I never, ever
Mr. Chairman, I'm
compared
happy to
COVID
enter into the record when
countermeasures.
Mr. Kennedy said that. I reclaim my time.
No to hate speech.
Mr. Goldman votes no.
Jeez.
Virtually everything, every statement that you just made about me is inaccurate.
And introduce the world to the big guy.
Because I'm Black.
Baseless conspiracy theory.
A 7th grader could understand this question.
I'm appalled and just so troubled by colleagues that I have to work with, that these are individuals who would bring a witness who's promoted a video that compared the COVID vaccine to the Tuskegee trials. The Tuskegee trials were a very difficult time in Black America. He vaccinated all his children, and I'd like that to be introduced into the record, but tells the Black community and myself, a mother of 5 Black children, that I should really be careful and not necessarily have the same safeguards to protect my family, my children, from a virus that has killed millions of people because I'm Black. Mr. Kennedy's and others here are claiming that they've been censored, but they actually have a huge megaphone. The rules that my colleague tried to bring up are rules that the Republicans made at the beginning of this Congress. They did not allow the Democrats to be part of that. And one of those rules was that if information or testimony might potentially defame an individual, that we would go in executive session. No one was trying to stop him from testifying, but not to give him the megaphone that this group has allowed him to have. I also note, in terms of censorship, that the far-right media has already issued articles about me playing the race card. The race card is something that's often used against Black people for bringing up when they see race hatred being propagated against them. And it's a means to try and keep us quiet and keep us in our place. Oh, you're playing the race card by bringing up what is obvious in our lives, what is obviously happening, race. And so you can keep saying I'm race baiting and try and censor me, but I'm going to continue to tell the truth. I want to be abundantly clear about what else is happening in this room. The MAGA Republicans are trying to scare social media companies into not taking down blatantly false information in the lead up to our 2024 presidential election. Chair Jordan knows, as we do, that when conspiracy theories succeed, so does Donald Trump. Why would the Republican leadership and the committee majority give a hearing and a platform to the witnesses today, specifically to Mr. Kennedy, a man who has recently claimed that COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and Black people? The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese. And before that, in his film, Medical Racism, The New Apartheid, that film stated that COVID-19 vaccines do not work for Black children because of their, quote, kick-ass kind of immune system, that hyper, superhuman, subhuman kind of language. He also said, even in Hitler's Germany, you could cross the Alps to Switzerland. You could hide in an attic like Anne Frank did, to imply Jews in Nazi Germany had more freedoms than unvaccinated Americans during the COVID-19 pandemic. This Republican charge of free speech is being used by Republican members to promote quasi-science, things such as the replacement theory that says that brown people are replacing good white Americans here in this country. Let's not remember that this country first belonged to brown Native American people. It's a rallying cry for bigotry and hate. Excuse me, point of order. I know that witnesses usually have 5 minutes. I see 10 minutes on the board. Is it going to be 10 minutes for
We'll
every
give him 5
witness?
minutes, but we're pretty lax with this. We'll let him go for
We are?
a little, yeah.
I've seen you gavel down on quite a number of witnesses.
We've given senators and former Democrat members of Congress and all kinds
He's
of folks plenty
neither.
of time.
Even either.
I'm just saying in past history.
Okay,
in
okay.
committee. But
Let's just watch the time for all the witnesses.
And if
then.
you want to cut him off and censor him some more, you're welcome to do it.
Oh, that's not my job. That's your job. Why don't you threaten a witness so that they can not want to be a witness?
Mr. Kennedy is recognized for his opening statement. We'll give him 5 minutes, more or less, and then we'll move to the next one.
And by the way, I want to say this while I'm on the record, that in my entire life, and why I'm under oath, in my entire life, I have never uttered a phrase that was either racist or anti-Semitic. I know many of the people who wrote this letter. I don't believe there's a single person who signed this letter who believes I'm anti-Semitic. I do not believe that. There is no evidence of that. Now, I want to say something I think that's more important, and it goes directly to what you talked about, ranking member, which is the need, this toxic polarization that is destroying our country today. And how do we deal with that? This kind of division is more dangerous for our country than any time since the American Civil War. And how do we deal with that? How are we going to, every Democrat on this committee believes that we need to end that polarization. Do you think you can do that by censoring people? I'm telling you, you cannot. That only aggravates and amplifies the problem. We need to start being kind to each other. We need to start being respectful to each other. We need to start restoring the comedy to this chamber and to the rest of America, but it has to start here. My uncle, Edward Kennedy, has more legislation with his name on it than any senator in United States history. Why is that? Because he was able to reach across the aisle, because he didn't deal in insults, because he didn't try to censor people. He brought home people who were antithetical to what he believed in. He came home almost every weekend with people like Orrin Hatch to our house at the compound in Hyannisport. At that time, Orrin Hatch to me was like Darth Vader, because I was an environmentalist. And I was saying, why is Teddy bringing this guy home? But he knew that he was effective because he understood that comedy and respect and kindness and compassion and empathy for other people is the only way to restore the function in this chamber. But more importantly, today we need to give an example in the leadership of our country of being respectful to each other. If you think I said something that's anti-Semitic, let's talk about the details. I'm telling you all the things that I'm accused of right now by you. And in this letter are distortions, they're misrepresentations. I didn't say those things. There's fragments that I said, but I denounce anybody who uses the words that I have said to imply something that is negative about people who are Jewish. I never said those things. And I want to point out also that the chairman pointed to Dennis Kucinich, who's fighting behind me. There is no two people in the country who feel more differently about American politics than these two people. And yet they were friends. Dennis attended his children's basketball games, attended his daughter's wedding. This is what we need, how we need to start treating each other in this country. We have to stop trying to destroy each other, to marginalize, to vilify, to gaslight each other. We have to find that place inside of ourselves of light, of empathy, of compassion, and above all, we need to elevate the Constitution of the United States, which was written for hard times. And that has to be the premier compass for all of our activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to raise a point of order.
Gentlelady can state a point of order.
Point of order pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, which Mr. Kennedy is violative of. I move that we remove into executive session because Mr. Kennedy has repeatedly made despicable anti-Semitic and anti-Asian comments as recently as last week. Rule 11, Clause 2 says whenever it is asserted by a member of the committee that the evidence or testimony at a hearing may tend to defame, degrade, or incriminate any person, or it is asserted by a witness that the evidence or testimony that the witness would give at a hearing may tend to defame, degrade, or incriminate the witness, and it goes on. Mr. Kennedy, among many other things, has said, I know a lot now about bioweapons. We put out hundreds of millions of dollars into ethnically targeted microbes. The Chinese have done the same thing. In fact, COVID-19, there is an argument that it is ethnically targeted. COVID-19 attacks certain races disproportionately. The races that are most immune to COVID-19 are...
Lady making a motion or a speech?
I've made a motion to move into executive session because Mr. Kennedy's testimony...
Mr. Chairman, I
and
move
his
to table the
previous
motion.
statements-
The gentleman from Kentucky has moved to table. Question is on
Mr.
the-
Chairman, I ask for
question is-
a roll call vote on the motion to table.
Well, let me ask the question. The question is on the motion to table. The gentlelady has asked for a roll call vote. The clerk will have to step back for a second. The clerk will have to come in. We'll call the roll on the motion to table, and then we can get back to testimony.
I think the witnesses can sit in the chairs sitting behind.
I'll leave that up to the clerks. If the clerks are comfortable with that. Yeah, why don't we do that? Maybe we can go right down here.
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Gentleman from Louisiana.
Is it the custom of this committee to censor viewpoints that we disagree with from witnesses?
Mr. Chairman, I have
That's not a point of order.
a motion on the table
There's a motion and the vote's
to
been
move into
called.
executive
House
session
rules.
because
We're waiting
Mr.
for
Kennedy
the clerks.
is violative of
Waiting
Rule
for the
11, Clause
clerks.
2.
Waiting for the clerks. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan.
Yes.
Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Issa. Mr. Massey.
Yes, to not censor.
Mr. Massey votes yes. Mr. Stewart. Yes. Mr. Stewart votes yes. Ms. Stefanik.
Yes.
Ms. Stefanik votes yes. Mr. Gates. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes yes. Mr. Armstrong.
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong votes yes. Mr. Stube. Mr. Bishop. Yes. Mr. Bishop votes yes. Ms. Kamak.
Yes.
Ms. Kamak votes yes. Ms. Hageman. Yes. Ms. Hageman votes yes. Ms. Pasquette.
No, I want to follow the rules that the Republicans made at the beginning of this conference with these House rules, so no.
Ms. Pasquette votes no. Mr. Lynch. No. Mr. Lynch votes no. Ms. Sanchez.
No, because it's violative of the rules.
Ms. Sanchez votes no. Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
No to allowing a witness to degrade and
This is not
defame
speech
others
time.
and violate the rules and not have his testimony and degradation and amplified
Mr. Chair.
rather than given in executive session.
Ms. Wasserman Schultz votes no. Mr. Connolly.
No to the Soviet Politburo.
Mr. Connolly votes no. Mr. Garamendi.
No.
Mr. Garamendi votes no. Mr. Allred. Ms. Garcia.
No.
Ms. Garcia votes no. Mr. Goldman.
No to hate speech.
Mr. Goldman votes no.
Jeez.
Mr. Gates. Yes.
Mr. Gates. Aye. Mr. Gates votes aye.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 10 ayes and 8 noes.
The motion to table is agreed to.
Is what is happening here is we are 100% trying to censor one gentleman because one side doesn't agree with his comments. So in a weaponization hearing about censorship, the left is trying to censor, which I think is absolutely crazy.
Wow. The irony and cognitive dissonance from the other side of the aisle. It's deafening. You could cut it with a knife. They are at the same time denying that censorship is occurring, but suggesting that there's more material that needs to be censored. This is a hearing on censorship that began with an effort, with a formal motion from the other side of the aisle to censor Mr. Kennedy. They do not want him to speak, yet that is the topic of this hearing. They have kept him from speaking. A collusion between the government and private organizations. Mr. Kennedy, in your opening statement, you introduced us to this word malinformation. Can you tell us more about this made-up word, what it means, and some of the things that you've said or tried to say that you've been censored for that's been characterized as malinformation?
Yes, Congressman Massey, and if by your leave, I'd like to just respond very
Please.
briefly to some of the, what I would call defamations that have been just applied to me by the ranking member. I'm happy to talk to you about my opinions on these issues. What you have stated and tried to associate me with through guilt by association is simply inaccurate. Virtually everything, every statement that you just made about me is inaccurate. I have never advised Black Americans not to receive vaccines. At one point you say I'm anti-vax, and that's a bad thing. The other moment you point out that all my children are vax. I'm fully compliant with the vaccine schedule myself, except for COVID. I took flu vaccines for 20 years straight. I have never been anti-vax. I have never told the public avoid vaccination. The only thing I've asked for, and my views are constantly misrepresented, so that the truth of what I believe is not, we're not allowed to have a conversation about that with the American people, which I believe vaccines should be tested with the same rigor as other medicines and medications. You tried to associate me a moment ago with the replacement theory, which is racist.
No, I did not say you
Time
had the
belongs to the
replacement
gentleman
theory.
from-
I
I
said
did
my
not-
colleagues.
Time belongs to the gentleman from
I
Kentucky.
denounce that theory. It is racist, and I have never endorsed it or had any association with it. Our film on a medical... By the way,
medical apartheid?
Bill Buxton, who is the Black CDC official who ultimately exposed the Tuskegee experiment, tried for years and years to appeal to CDC to stop it for 40 years. Finally, he got relief by walking into my uncle's office in the building next door. Teddy held hearings and ended the experiment. I remember that very well. And to say that I created a film that encourages blacks not to get adequate medical care is just completely abhorrent.
Don't misuse my words.
It's the
sir.
witness's time. Do not censor the witness.
I'm
If
not
the-
censoring
if
the
the-
witness.
Yeah.
I'm not
If the-
censoring the witness. He's still talking.
It's
I don't
it's my
have the
time, and I've
ability to
given it to the witness. Do not censor him.
I'm not
the-
censoring him.
If the views that you and others have applied to me, I've attributed to me, if they were actually true, I can see why I shouldn't be able to testify here today. Those are not true. These are defamations and malignancies that are used to censor me, to prevent people from listening to the actual things that I'm saying. And I think, ranking member, that we should have a real conversation rather than an exchange of ad hominem attacks. And answer very quickly to your question, the term malinformation was coined to describe information that Facebook and Twitter and the other social media sites understood was true, but that the White House and other federal agencies wanted censored anyway for political reasons because it challenged official orthodoxies. I'll give you one example. I was included in a group called the Disinformation Dozen. And Facebook and others were asked to censor us, which they did. And by the way, my Heck Aaron post, it was taken down. My whole Instagram account with 900,000 people was taken down because of that. So they knew, Facebook knew that the Disinformation Dozen claim, and what they said was the Disinformation Dozen came from this very shady group called the Center for Preventing Digital Hate in England that is funded by dark money, that should be looked into. They claim that 65% of the vaccine misinformation on the internet was generated by those 12 people. Facebook itself said that is impossible. That is false information. We know that not to be true. And yet, when the White House asked them to censor this Disinformation Dozen, including me, they did it anyway when they knew it to be untrue.
I'm here today because I published a series of news stories 3 years ago in October of 2020 about Hunter Biden's now infamous laptop, also known as the laptop from hell, which is seen as some of the most scandalous reporting of the last decade. What was more scandalous than the reporting itself, though, was the fact that it exposed the unholy alliance between the intelligence community, social media platforms, and legacy media outlets. I documented an off-the-books meeting between then Vice President Biden and a Ukrainian energy executive and introduced the world to the big guy who got action on a deal with CEFC, China Energy Company. The Post published exactly how the material for the reporting was obtained, even identifying our sources, as well as a federal subpoena showing the FBI was in possession of the material the story was based on and had been since December of 2019. But when the stories appeared on social media that morning, the venue where millions of Americans go to find their news and editors to get their angles, within hours, the reporting was censored on all major platforms on the basis of being called hacked or Russian disinformation.
Here, a few months ago, Mr. Kennedy, you compared COVID public health policies to barbaric murderous tactics of Nazi Germany, saying that Jewish people in Nazi Germany had more freedom than Americans facing COVID health restrictions. In hindsight, Mr. Kennedy, do you reject this absurd and deeply hurtful and harmful comparison, or do you still stand by it?
Congressman, what you are saying is a lie.
That you said it.
I did not. I never contained.
Okay.
I never, ever
Mr. Chairman, I'm
compared
happy to
COVID
enter into the record when Mr.
countermeasures.
Kennedy said that. I reclaim my time. In discussing COVID public health measures, you made light of the genocide against Jewish people by saying, and I quote, "Even Hitler's Germany, you could cross the Alps to Switzerland, you could hide in an attic like Anne Frank did." Mr. Kennedy, do you think it was easy for Jewish people to escape systematic slaughter of Nazis, yes or no?
Absolutely not.
Okay, good. Mr. Kennedy, do you think it was just as hard to wear a mask during COVID as it was to hide under floorboards or false walls so you weren't murdered or dragged to a concentration camp? Yes or no?
Excuse me?
That's a question, yes or no?
I didn't hear your question.
Okay. I said, do you think it was just as hard to wear a mask during COVID as it was to hide under floorboards or false walls so you weren't murdered or dragged to a concentration camp?
Of course not. That's
Okay.
ridiculous.
But that's a comparison that you made.
I did
Mr.
not
Kennedy,
make that comparison.
Were the measures taken to contain the spread and fatalities related to COVID in any way at all comparable to the murder of 6 million Jews, yes or no?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Let's be very clear here. There's no legitimate comparison to the Holocaust. It doesn't matter if you're talking about AI, vaccine mandates, or anything else. There is no comparison. And if this were a slip of the tongue, Mr. Kennedy, or a one-off comment, we would all move on. But there's a deeply disturbing pattern. In 2015, you apologized to all those, quote, whom I offended by my use of the word Holocaust to describe the autism epidemic.
We agree the government shouldn't be responsible for restricting views that the American people are exposed to. We agree on that, right? You wouldn't answer it at first, but it's clear that you do agree with that.
That's a different question.
Okay, so to my question, do you agree with it or not?
I agree that the government should not violate our Constitution.
Do you agree with my question?
Your question is
Should the government
whether or not
determine,
the
this is so simple.
No, it is not so simple.
No, I'm going to ask it one time, and it is so simple. A 7th grader could understand this question. Should the government be responsible for the views and the facts that the American people are exposed to?
The problem I have is that I don't know of any facts in which the government tells us what to believe.
I'm going to say that you're unable to answer a question, which for me is fairly shocking as an American citizen.
There's an opportunity to have a conspiracy theory here. There's an opportunity to make political points. And no matter what you may think, Mr. Kennedy, and I revere your name, you're not here to propound your case for censorship. You are here for cynical reasons to be used politically by that side of the aisle to embarrass the current president of the United States, and you're an enabler in that effort today. And it brings shame on a storied name that I revere. I began my political interest with your father, and it makes me profoundly sad to see where we have descended today in this hearing.
YouTube deplatformed me. I didn't talk about vaccines in that speech. I didn't talk about anything that was a verboten subject. I just was talking about my campaign and things, the conversation that we ought to be having with each other as Americans. But I was shut down, and that is why the First Amendment's important. Debate, congenial, respectful debate is the fertilizer, it's the water, it's the sunlight for our democracy. We need to be talking to each other. Now, this is a letter that many of you signed, many of my fellow Democrats. I've spent my life in this party. I've devoted my life to the values of this party. This 102 people signed this. This itself is evidence of the problem that this hearing was convened to address. This is an attempt to censor a censorship hearing.
And I will tell you, as a Black woman who lived through COVID in New York City, where we watched too many images of refrigerated trucks with the bodies of loved ones because there were too many deaths to accommodate in morgues that surpassed the deaths during the Spanish flu, and where in this country we have lost over 1 million of our loved ones. And for the Black community, for the Native American community, for so many communities of color in particular, where our rates of death were 3 to 4 times those of some other groups. 3 to 4 times.
Mr. Kennedy, you're well educated. So yes or no, please. Are you aware that for centuries, Jews have been scapegoated and blamed for causing illnesses like Black Plague and more recently COVID?
I am. Those are known as blood libel, and they are one of the worst and most disturbing parts of human history.
Good. I'm glad to know that, of course, that you acknowledge that. Of course, it's true and well documented that this pernicious form of anti-Semitism led to centuries of discrimination, even horrific pogroms and massacres, and it still fuels deadly violence today. Yet last week, you floated a baseless conspiracy theory that the coronavirus was bioengineered to target Caucasians and Black people, but to spare Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese people. Mr. Kennedy, your bizarre, unproven claim echoes that same historic slander of labeling Jews and Chinese people as a race, and that Jews, and in this case Chinese people, somehow managed to avoid a deadly illness that targets other groups for death. You do see that, yes or no?
You're misstating.
No. I quoted what you said earlier, and it is directly what you said. So just ask me yes or no.
I was describing an NIH-funded study.
No, you didn't cite any.
I was describing an NIH-funded study by Cleveland Clinic scientists.
Reclaiming my time. You did not reference. Reclaiming my
published
time.
in USC
Mr.
Medical,
Chairman,
which is one.
The time is mine. I'm reclaiming it. Please ask the witness to stop talking.
You asked me a question.
Reclaiming.
Allow me to answer my question.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like about 10 seconds back.
The time belongs. You are slandering me incorrectly. You're saying it's dishonest.
Time belongs to the gentlelady from Florida.
Defend myself.
Mr.
Time
Chairman,
belongs to the gentlelady from Florida.
I'd like 15 seconds back.
We will
Mr.
be happy to
Chairman.
give you that.
Thank you so much. You did not cite any study like you are citing here now during that conversation. You referenced no study at all. You simply labeled Jews and Chinese people as a race, and you also said that somehow they managed to avoid a deadly illness that targets other groups for death. You don't see that? You're trying to rewrite history here.
Ms. Morris, isn't it true that your October 2020 Hunter Biden laptop from hell story has proven to be 100% factually accurate?
I was 27 when I published that story. It better have been.
Let me ask you this. You referenced your father and your uncle and the party that they were in. What has happened to your party with respect to the First Amendment? Would they recognize the position now?
I think, listen, I'm a Democrat, and I believe in if you went through a checklist of all of the things that my father believed in, that he fought for, that my uncle believed in and fought for, I would check every box. I feel my party has departed from some of those core values, and one of the reasons that I want to run for president is to reclaim my party for those. But it's got to, listen, this is not a partisan issue. The First Amendment, it just seems crazy to me that anybody thinks that it's okay to censor.
I'm frightened by where we go.
May I, Mr. Chairman?
You may not.
I just
Mr.
want to
Chair,
respond.
Mr. Chair, the time is out. We're done.
I haven't adjourned the hearing, and I don't think you're the chair.
Mr. Chair,
Chairman's discretion.
I know it's your discretion.
We're going to let Mr. Kennedy.
He has had so much additional time.
Well, I think everyone's had
Why?
additional time.
No, why? Why are you doing that specifically for him?
Because we
I just
don't
want to
opposed to other
explain.
people.
I'm sure the witness,
super
Then
PAC.
explain
I'm sure the
on
Democratic
other
witness will be
places.
as short as he possibly can.
No. Are you going to allow our witness to just give another piece?
No,
of
let him
what-
address
I
the
wanna
defamatory
acknowledge-
comment that was made
address-
about him that's untrue.
That was not defamatory. That is a legal definition that was not met.
I want to
And was
acknowledge
it my-
information about the super PAC that you mentioned.
Go ahead.
I've just been told that that super PAC is connected to somebody that we have a connection to. It's not a super PAC that I've endorsed, and it's not one, as I said, that I've ever heard of.
Thank the gentleman for that statement, and I thank you for your testimony. The committee is now adjourned.